The lamp at the end of the Ardmore Hotel's service corridor flickered once, as a hand closed hard around Maren Coyle's wrist and pulled her into the shadows behind the kitchen door. She lost her breath, looked up, and found the calm, chilling smile of Gideon Stroud. "You're going to listen to me," he said, lowering his voice, pressing a folded stack of papers into her hand. "Sign this, and the debt your father left behind disappears before sunrise." She tried to pull free, but his fingers only tightened. Less than 100 feet away, the sound of glassware and laughter drifted from the main lounge, close enough to hear, far too distant to help her. On the small platform she had stepped down from 5 minutes earlier, her father's violin still lay in its open case, the only thing he had left her, and the reason she didn't dare wrench her arm away. "Let go of me," she said, keeping her voice level even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "My father has been dead for 2 years. He doesn't owe anyone anything anymore." Stroud leaned closer, his voice almost gentle. "You're mistaken, Miss Coyle. The care facility where your brother is recovering happens to sit in my portfolio. The contract comes up for renewal next month. I would very much like to see it renewed." She opened her mouth to answer words were the only weapon she had when footsteps sounded on the tile behind them, unhurried, in no rush at all. Maren felt Stroud go rigid. The man who stepped into view stopped a few paces away, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, and took in the entire scene in a single glance. Her bloodless face, Stroud's hand still wrapped around her wrist, the unsigned papers. "Mr. Stroud," he said, his voice so level it sent a chill down her spine. "I wasn't aware this corridor had become a place for business." Then he did something that stopped her breath entirely. He crossed the space between them, drew her firmly against his side, bent close to her ear and said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, "Kiss me, otherwise he'll understand that you belong to no one." Maren had no idea who this man was. She had never spoken a word to him beyond a thank you, 3 nights ago, when he had dropped money into her open violin case. But there was no time to ask, no time to think, because he had already leaned down, and the corridor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. When he drew back, his hand still resting lightly at her waist, Stroud's smile was gone. He released her wrist, took a step back, and in that moment Maren realized something that frightened her more than the hand that had just gripped her. This stranger, with nothing but a single bow of his head, had made Gideon Stroud afraid, and she had just become part of something she did not understand at all. If Maren's story touched your heart, leave a like so we know you're listening. Share this video with someone you believe needs to hear this story today. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories we make just for you. He didn't let go of her right away. The hand resting lightly at her waist stayed there for another 3 steps, long enough for anyone standing at the far end of the hallway to see, and only fell away once they had reached the brighter patch near the service staircase. Maren jerked her arm out of his reach and spun around. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice still steady, though it had begun to tremble at the end, the tremor of someone who had just realized she had been standing far too long on a sheet of thin ice without knowing it. "What did you just do to my life?" The man looked at her for a moment before answering, with the expression of someone deciding how much of the truth he was willing to give. "Elias Ferrante." The name fell between them, and nothing more needed to be said. Maren had heard that name before. At the diner where she worked the lunch shift, people mentioned it the way they talked about winter weather, without fear, without admiration, simply as something real that everyone knew existed. She felt the blood drain from her face for the second time in less than 10 minutes. "You aren't going to apologize to me?" she said. "No," Elias replied. "If I apologize, you'll think what just happened was a mistake. It wasn't. You just kissed someone you've never even spoken to." "I did the only thing that would work in the 7 seconds I had," he said. "Did you see him let go of you? It wasn't because he was kind. It was because he was calculating. In my world, a name works faster than a gun, and it doesn't leave anything behind for the police to pick up and examine." Maren opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wanted to say that she didn't live in his world, that she was only a hired musician who played 4 hours every night for cash and went home before 1 o'clock in the morning, but the words died on her tongue because she understood, somewhere deep and cold inside herself, that the sentence had just stopped being true. "You're thinking this is over now," Elias said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only a calmness so complete it was unsettling. "I'll tell you what you haven't had time to think about yet. Before tonight, you were a woman Gideon Stroud could corner in a hallway and force to sign papers. After tonight, you're a woman standing under the Ferrante name. That lie didn't erase the man hunting you. It only changed who's hunting you. Changed it to who? To everyone who wants to know why I did it," he said. And there are more of them than you think. She looked at him, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel afraid. Instead, anger began to rise inside her very slowly, the kind of anger that had been sleeping in her for 2 years, ever since the morning someone called to tell her what had happened to her father. So, what am I supposed to do now? Tonight, go home, Elias said. Lock the door. Tomorrow, go to work like normal. Don't tell anyone about what happened. Not even the person you trust most. You don't have the right to tell me what to do. No, he agreed. Those are just the words I have. Whether you listen to them is up to you. Then he turned away, and Marin realized he really was going to leave just like that, without another explanation, without another name, leaving her standing in the service hallway of a hotel where she had played violin for 14 months, and which now suddenly felt completely unfamiliar. She walked back toward the lobby, her steps moving faster than her breathing, and stopped at the small platform where her father's violin still lay in its open case exactly as she had left it. No one had touched it. A few coins from guests were scattered across the velvet lining, along with a folded bill someone had left while she was gone. She bent down to close the case, and when she lifted both hands to fasten the latches, she finally noticed what she was still holding, the stack of papers. It was still in her left hand, folded in half, the edges wrinkled where her fingers had been gripping it without her realizing. She had walked the entire length of the hallway, had argued with a man whose name had made Gideon Stroud step back, and she hadn't once remembered that she was still holding what Stroud had given her. Marin stood motionless, staring at it for several seconds. Then she slipped it between the lining and the side of the violin case, closed the lid, fastened the latches, and when she looked up, she saw Elias Ferrante still standing at the far end of the lobby, about 20 steps away, not gone at all as she had thought. He was looking at the violin case in her hand, not at her, at the case, and he looked at it 1 second longer than necessary for someone who had only happened to glance in that direction, long enough for Marin to feel it, even though she didn't yet understand why. She waited for him to say something. He didn't. He only tilted his head slightly, the same small gesture that had made Stroud release her 10 minutes earlier, then walked through the door and disappeared into the night. The lights in the apartment were still on when Marin opened the door, and she knew what that meant before she even saw her brother. Rory was standing at the far end of the living room, both hands gripping the railing the hospital had loaned them, his body leaning forward as he shifted his weight onto his right leg and slowly brought his left foot ahead. He didn't turn when he heard the lock. He only said, his voice breaking with concentration, "Don't help me. I can do it." Marin stood still in the doorway, one hand still holding the strap of the violin case over her shoulder, and watched her 20-year-old brother make it through 3 steps along the railing before finally letting out a long breath and dropping heavily into the chair. The doctor had said the 11th month was the hardest. Rory was in his 13th. 4 steps, he said, looking up with a smile. Yesterday it was 3. 4, Marin repeated, trying to make her voice sound normal. She set the violin case down beside the wall, and while bending over, she pulled the long sleeve farther down over her left wrist. The bruise hadn't fully surfaced yet, but the skin there had already begun to darken into a faint ring, shaped exactly like fingers. She tugged the sleeve down a little farther before standing upright again. "Why are you home so late today?" Rory asked, reaching for the bottle of water on the table. "I looked at the clock at 12:30 and thought you'd already be back." Marin walked into the kitchen, turning her back to him. "The hotel had a party," she said. "They asked me to play an extra hour. Double pay." The lie slipped from her mouth so easily, so smoothly, that even she was surprised, and almost immediately a sick feeling rose in her chest. Because in the 2 years since that morning, when someone had called to tell them about their father, she had never once lied to her brother. Not because she was noble. It was simply that the two of them had nothing left in the world except each other. And the truth was the only thing that didn't cost money. "Double pay is good," Rory said behind her. "Just remember to keep some of it for yourself. Don't give everything to the rehab center again." "Yeah. You said yeah in the way that means you're going to give everything to the rehab center. Go to bed, Rory." He laughed, and the railing creaked as he pushed himself upright. Before going into his room, he paused in the doorway and said in the casual voice of someone who had just remembered something that didn't matter much, "Oh, the lock on the downstairs entrance seems loose again. You remember before? That time someone broke into our place?" Marin stood motionless in the middle of the kitchen. "I remember. Exactly 1 week after Dad's funeral," Rory said. "They only took the old television and a few $dozen from the drawer. The police said places around here get hit every month. I always thought it was kind of funny. There wasn't anything in this apartment worth stealing, and someone still came in. I was working the night shift that night, Marin said, and she didn't understand why she had spoken that detail aloud. Yeah, you were at work. I was in the hospital. Nobody was home. He tapped 2 fingers lightly against the doorframe. Call someone about the lock tomorrow, okay? Or let me call. Then he went into his room and closed the door. Marin stood listening to the bed creak on the other side of the thin wall until the sound finally stopped. She poured herself a glass of water, drank all of it, then walked back to the violin case standing beside the wall. She opened the latches, lifted the lid, and pulled the stack of papers from where she had tucked it between the lining and the side of the case. Under the kitchen light, what she held looked surprisingly ordinary. 4 sheets of paper, dense with small print and terms she had to read twice before she understood them, and at the bottom of the 4th page was a blank line for a signature, with her name already printed beneath it, including her full middle name, typed correctly down to every letter. Someone had prepared these papers in advance, perhaps days earlier, and had only been waiting for a hallway dark enough. She turned back to the 2nd page, where there was an itemized statement, and there, printed in bold on the final line, was the number, $37,000. Marin read it again, then she read it one more time. She set the paper down on the table and lowered herself into the chair very slowly, as though afraid she might disturb something delicately balanced inside her mind. Because the debt her father had left behind, the debt she had been paying for 2 years with 2 jobs and not a single day off, the debt that had consumed the insurance money, the money from selling the car, and nearly the violin 3 separate times. That debt wasn't $37,000. It was far larger than that. She sat motionless beneath the kitchen light, the white sheet of paper lying before her, and inside her mind a question began to open very slowly, like a door she had never known was there. If that man held all of her father's debt in his hands, then why did the paper he had tried to force her to sign say only $37,000? The call came at 10 o'clock the next morning, while Marin was tying on her apron and getting ready for the lunch shift at Delmar's. A woman's voice, slow and precise, said that she would very much like to have lunch with her at 12:30 at a restaurant, exactly 4 blocks from the diner, and that she had already spoken with Marin's shift manager, so there was no need to worry about work. Marin said she still had a shift to do. The woman replied that she understood, then repeated the time once more and hung up. It wasn't an invitation, and Marin knew that the moment she lowered the phone. Rosalind Ferrante was already seated when she arrived, at a corner table, with a clear view of the door, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She was in her 60s, her silver hair gathered neatly into a bun, and she had the straight-backed posture of a woman who had spent decades making sure she never appeared unsettled in front of anyone. She pointed to the chair across from her. Marin sat down, still holding the violin case in her lap, because she hadn't had time to take it home before her lunch shift. "How long have you known my son?" Rosalind asked, without greeting her or easing into the subject. "Since the night before last," Marin said, "and yet he kissed you in the middle of a hotel hallway." Marin felt heat rise into her cheeks and hated herself for it. "Who told you?" "Miss Coyle," Rosalind said gently. 120 people were at that hotel the night before last. At least 4 of them are paid by my family. Second question. Did my son give you anything? Money, papers, a name to call if you needed help? No, it was the truth, and Marin said it easily. But Rosalind tilted her head, studied her for a long moment, then said, "But Mr. Stroud did." Marin didn't answer. She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no, and the silence answered for her. She saw something shift very slightly in the eyes of the woman across from her. Not satisfaction, but something closer to weariness. Third question, Rosalind said. "What was your father's name?" Marin looked up. "Why are you asking about my father?" "Because that's the only one of the 3 questions I already knew the answer to," Rosalind said. "I wanted to see how you would react when you heard it." A chair scraped against the floor, and Elias Ferrante sat down in the 3rd chair without being invited, took off his coat, draped it over the back, and spoke to his mother in the same calm voice he had used with Stroud in the hallway. "You're frightening her." "I'm having tea," Rosalind said. "You're interrogating a woman during her workday. If you'd told me first, I wouldn't have had to ask." The 2 of them looked at each other across the table, and Marin understood that this conversation had begun before she arrived, perhaps before the night before last, and she had merely happened to sit down in the middle of it. Rosalind stood, slipped her purse over her arm, and before leaving, she paused beside Marin's chair. "I don't mean to frighten you, Miss Coyle. I'm only going to tell you one thing that took me 4 years to learn, and I learned it in the most expensive way possible. Secrets always find their way into the light. We simply never get to choose when." Then she left, and Elias remained for a few more minutes, saying little beyond asking whether Maren had managed to sleep, and Maren lied for the second time in 2 days. She reached the apartment at nearly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after finishing the rest of her lunch shift. The door was still locked. The loose lock was still loose, but after taking only 3 steps inside, she stopped. The bottom drawer of the storage cabinet was closed, and she knew with absolute certainty that when she left that morning it had been opened by about 2 finger widths, because the wooden brace inside had been warped for years. The stack of letters and bills on the table was still there, still in the same place, but the edges of the papers had been straightened into alignment in a way that only a human hand could have done. She went into the bedroom. The closet was shut. Her clothes were still hanging where they belonged, but the metal box holding their identification papers, birth certificates, insurance documents, and a copy of her father's death certificate, the box she always kept lying flat in the farthest corner, was now standing lengthwise. Maren stood in the middle of the room, her heart beating slowly and heavily, and checked everything one item at a time. Nothing was missing. Not a single dollar from the drawer. Not one item from the metal box. Not one sheet of paper gone. Whoever had come inside hadn't taken anything. Whoever had come inside had been looking for something, and that something, ever since the night before last, had been folded in half between the lining and the side of the violin case, traveling with her out of the hotel, traveling with her through the lunch shift at the diner, traveling with her to Rosalind Ferrante's table, and resting in her lap throughout that entire meal. She set the violin case down on the bed very slowly and sat beside it. The same pattern, the same feeling of walking into her own home and finding everything where it belonged, yet somehow wrong. 2 years earlier, exactly 1 week after her father's funeral, someone had come into this apartment too. The police had called it a petty burglary. An old television and a few dozen dollars from a drawer had been taken, and that night, just like today, her father's violin had been on her shoulder, somewhere very far from this home. She didn't have his number, and she had no intention of asking anyone for it. That evening, Maren arrived at the Ardmore Hotel 40 minutes before her shift, carrying the violin case with her. She walked straight through the lobby and told the front desk manager that she needed to leave a message for Mr. Ferrante. The man behind the counter looked up at her for exactly 2 seconds, then picked up the phone. 40 minutes later, just as she finished tuning the violin, a broad-shouldered man, with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a black coat, came over to the platform and told her that a car was waiting for her at the east entrance, that someone had already been arranged to cover her performance that night, and that his name was Bruno. The room they brought her to was on the 4th floor of an old building near the harbor, with windows overlooking the black water below. Elias was standing beside a table, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, and when he saw her walk in, he didn't ask why she had come. Maren set the violin case down, opened the latches, took out the stack of papers, and placed it on the table in front of him. "He gave me this," she said. "Someone got into my apartment yesterday. Nothing was taken. They were looking for it." Elias didn't touch the papers immediately. He looked at them, then at her, and she saw the exact moment when he made some kind of decision. "Have you read it?" "I have. What do you think?" "I think someone typed my full name into it days ago," Maren said, "and I think the number on page 2 is wrong." Only then did he pick up the papers. He read them very slowly, turned to the second page, stopped, then flipped back to the first, and started again from the beginning. When he looked up, the calm expression on his face was still there, but something behind it had hardened. He called Bruno into the room, handed him the papers, and said exactly 3 words. "Look at the beginning." Bruno took them, and Maren watched the man in his 50s read, saw him narrow his eyes slightly, then walk to the filing cabinet in the corner, pull out a thick folder, open it, and place 2 sheets of paper side by side beneath the desk lamp. "Same margins," Bruno said. "Same line spacing. Same way of breaking the clauses into 4 sections instead of 3. And no lawyer in this city drafts documents that way." He looked up at Elias. "Same person." Maren stared at the 2 pages, lying beside each other on the table, one carrying her name, the other carrying the name of a family she had only heard about for the first time 3 days earlier. "Now it's your turn," she said. "You asked me 3 questions through your mother. I just gave you something people broke into my home to find. You owe me the truth." Elias looked at her for a moment, then pulled out a chair, sat down, and began to speak, his voice flat and controlled, like a man reciting a report he had already memorized. 3 months earlier, he had discovered a series of loan documents bearing his father's signature, signed during the last years of the older man's life, involving sums of money the family had never borrowed and creditors the family had never met. The signatures were forged so perfectly that 3 handwriting experts had confirmed them as genuine. The collateral listed for all of those loans was Harbor Point, the stretch of waterfront property his father had bought 19 years earlier, and the only part of the family's entire holdings that was being converted into completely legitimate business. A foreclosure petition had already been filed. The court had already set the auction date. How long? Marin asked. 31 days, Elias said. She sat down in the chair across from him, and the question came out before she had time to decide whether she should ask it. Then why don't you deal with this your way? Bruno shifted slightly in the corner of the room. Elias didn't change expression. He simply reached for a thin file at the edge of the table, opened it, and turned it toward her. Read it. It was a long legal document in small print, stamped and signed, with the signature of a federal judge and his father's signature on the final page. Marin didn't understand everything written there, but she understood enough. My father signed it 11 years ago so he wouldn't go to prison, and so I wouldn't grow up in a house without him, Elias said. It's still binding on his heir. That means me. It means that if anyone named Ferrante, or anyone paid by Ferrante, becomes involved in anything connected to violence, all of the assets are frozen within 48 hours, and I go to prison within a year. They don't need proof involving Harbor Point. They don't need anything else. They only need it to happen once. Marin looked up at him. Stroud knows about this. He's one of 6 people outside my family who know, Elias said. He didn't choose me because I'm rich. There are 10 people in this city richer than I am, and easier to take apart. He chose me because out of everyone he could have chosen, I'm the only one who isn't allowed to fight back. Outside the window, a barge moved very slowly across the black water, and in that room, Marin suddenly understood why a man who could make Gideon Stroud step back with nothing more than a slight tilt of his head had still been unable to do anything to him for 3 months. The summons arrived Thursday morning, tucked between 2 bills in the mailbox downstairs in her apartment building, and Elias Ferrante's name didn't appear anywhere on it, only hers. Marin Coyle, requested to appear at 10 o'clock Friday morning at the office of the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois to discuss a matter that wasn't specified. She stood beneath the hallway light and read it 3 times before folding it and slipping it into her coat pocket. The office on the 12th floor was smaller than she had imagined, and the woman sitting behind the desk looked nothing like any picture Marin had formed in her mind. She was in her 50s, with short hair, her jacket hanging on a hook behind her, and nothing on the desk except a closed file and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She pointed to the chair across from her. Camille Whitmore, she said, Assistant United States Attorney. Sit down. This won't take long. Marin sat, the violin case standing beside the leg of her chair because she was going straight from there to her lunch shift. Do I need a lawyer? If you feel that you do, then yes, Whitmore said. But I'm not asking you any questions. I invited you here to talk, not to question you. She didn't open the file. She simply rested both hands on top of it. Monday night, you appeared in a hallway at the Ardmore Hotel with Elias Ferrante. Wednesday morning, you had lunch with his mother. Wednesday night, a car belonging to that family picked you up at the east exit and took you to a building near the harbor, where you stayed for 1 hour and 40 minutes. 3 days. Miss Coyle, 3 days ago I didn't even know you existed. Marin kept her expression still. You've been following me. I've been following him, Whitmore said. For 11 years. You simply happened to step into the frame. She took a sip of the cold coffee, grimaced, and set it back down. I'm not going to threaten you. I have nothing to threaten you with. You haven't done anything wrong. And as far as I know, you're one of the very few people in this city working 2 jobs and still paying every dollar of tax you owe. I asked you here for another reason. She straightened in her chair. In the 11 years I've held this position, I've sat across from 9 women in this exact room, in the exact chair you're sitting in now. 7 of them told me the same thing, that they were only standing at the edge of it, that they weren't involved, that it would all pass. Not one of those 7 women was lying to me. They believed what they said. By the time they came back here, 2 had lost their jobs, 3 had been forced to leave the city, and 1 sat in that chair and gave a statement for 4 hours in exchange for not having to stand trial beside the man she loved. Marin felt the tips of her fingers grow cold. What about the other 2? The other 2 got out, Whitmore said. Both of them got out early. That's the only thing they had in common. Somewhere far below the window, a car horn sounded from the street. Marin thought about the papers with her full name already typed onto them. Thought about the metal box turned lengthwise in the closet. Thought about the 31 days that had now become only 28. You don't know why I was there, she said. No, Whitmore agreed. And I'm not asking. Have you noticed? I haven't asked you a single question since you walked in." She opened a drawer, took out a business card, wrote another number on the back in ballpoint pen, and slid it across the desk. "The number on the front is my office number, during the day. The number on the back is mine personally, any hour. I'm only going to tell you one thing, Miss Coyle, and then you can go to work." She looked directly into Marin's eyes. "If there ever comes a time when you want out of this, call me before you call anyone else." Before you call him, Marin looked at the business card lying between them on the desk. She thought about leaving it there, standing up, and walking out, because picking it up meant admitting that a day like that might come. Then she thought about her father. About 2 years spent paying a debt she now realized she understood nothing about, and she realized that through all those 2 years, she had never had anyone she could call. She picked up the card. "Thank you." Whitmore gave one brief nod and opened the file as though the meeting had already ended some time ago. In the elevator going down, Marin rested the violin case on her knees, opened the lid, and slipped the business card into the narrow space between the velvet lining and the side of the case, exactly where 4 days earlier she had hidden Gideon Stroud's papers. Then she closed the lid, fastened the latches, and walked 4 blocks to the diner in time for her lunch shift. The one who noticed wasn't Marin, but Dorsey, the bartender who had worked the Ardmore lobby bar for 9 years and was the only person in the hotel who still called her by her first name. Friday night, just after she stepped down from the platform following her first set, he slid a glass of water across the counter toward her and spoke in the casual tone of someone who had just remembered something that didn't seem to matter. "That man in the black coat. Haven't seen him around lately, have we?" Marin stopped halfway through, reaching for the glass. "What man?" "The one who sat at the corner table near the second window. 3 nights in a row. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Ordered a whiskey and sat there the whole time. Didn't drink it, didn't listen to the music, didn't look at his phone. I noticed because men like that usually stay 15 minutes and leave. He stayed until I was wiping down the bar." He shrugged. "Sunday night, he put money in your violin case on his way out. You remember." She remembered. She remembered every detail. The bill folded in half, her quiet thank you, the nod from a man who never broke stride. She had thought about that moment many times over the past 4 days, and every time she had thought about it in exactly the same way. "What was he looking at those 3 nights?" Marin asked. Dorsey wiped his hands on a towel. "Table 7. The table, mister. Stroud always takes on Monday nights." She reached the building near the harbor close to midnight, after finishing her final set, and Bruno opened the door without looking surprised, which told her that someone had already warned them she was coming. Elias was standing beside the window with a stack of papers in his hand, and he set them down when he saw her walk in with the violin case still hanging from her shoulder. 3 nights, Marin said. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Corner table near the second window. 1 whiskey you didn't drink." She set the violin case on the floor. "You didn't just happen to walk past that hallway Monday night. You sat in that lobby for 3 nights watching Gideon Stroud." Elias didn't deny it. He didn't look as though he had been caught, either. He simply watched her for a moment and said, "Yes, even the night you put money in my violin case. Even that night." Marin felt something inside her chest collapse very softly. Not a broken heart, but a small illusion she hadn't even realized she had been holding on to. Through all the moments of fear over the last 4 days, some small part of her had still believed that at least that night, someone had stepped forward because of her. "So you didn't save me," she said. "You just happened to be in the right place. Do you want me to lie to you?" "No." "Then yes," Elias said. "I was sitting there to see who he met. I'd been waiting 3 nights. Monday night, he got up halfway through the evening and headed toward the service hallway, and I followed him. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know who it was." He paused. "But when I turned that corner and saw his hand around your wrist, from that second on, I wasn't calculating anything anymore." Marin didn't answer right away. She stood there in the room with windows overlooking the black water and waited for the anger inside her to rise. It did. But behind it, arriving a few seconds later, came something else, sharper and more clear-headed, and that was what made her stay, instead of walking toward the door. "You sat there 3 nights to see who he was meeting," she said slowly. "That means you knew he was going to meet someone. That means he had business at that hotel." "Yes." "Then answer this." She stepped closer to the table. "How many people work for Gideon Stroud?" Elias looked at her. "A few hundred. On paper, does he have lawyers?" 3 firms. "Then why?" Marin said, her voice very calm. "Would a man with a few hundred employees and 3 law firms walk into a hotel service hallway himself close to midnight, carrying a document in his own hand, to force a hired violinist to sign it? He could have sent anyone. He could have mailed it. He could have had a lawyer call me into an office, and I wouldn't have had the money to hire anyone to fight back anyway. Why did he do it himself? The silence in the room lasted so long that Maren could hear the water below the harbor striking the pilings. Bruno, standing near the door, lifted his head. Elias said nothing. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, the calmness on his face wasn't something hiding another thought. It was the genuine blankness of a man who had just been asked the right question, one he had never thought to ask himself. "You haven't thought about that," she said. "No," Elias replied. Maren bent down, picked up the violin case, tucked it against her side, then straightened. "I'm in," she said. "Not because of you. I won't take a single dollar from you, so don't offer. I'm in because for the last 2 years, I've been paying a debt I now realize I don't understand at all." She looked directly at him. "I've been afraid for 2 years. I'd rather be useful than keep being afraid." The family's new restaurant opened on Tuesday night, on the ground floor of a renovated building 3 blocks from the harbor, and Elias told her she should be there, not to do anything, just to be there. Maren understood what that meant. For the past 4 days, the city had been talking, and people needed to see her standing beside him beneath the lights, instead of in some dark hallway. She arrived at 7 o'clock, and the man who met her at the door was Bruno. He didn't take her into the main room right away. He stopped in the stretch of hallway between the reception desk and the glass doors, where no one could hear them, and spoke without looking at her. "Do you know how many people, in the 27 years I've worked for this family, have stood exactly where you're standing now? I'm guessing quite a few." 4, Bruno said. "And 3 of them eventually got what they needed and disappeared." He turned to look at her. "I don't think you're a bad person, Miss Coyle. I only want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it before you walk through that door, not after." "Go ahead." "When this is over," Bruno said, "what are you going to do?" Maren opened her mouth. "Don't answer yet," he interrupted, his voice still calm. "Let me give you the 2 possibilities first. The first possibility is that we win. Harbor Point stays in our hands, Stroud is finished, and you get your answers about your father. Then you go home, work the lunch shift, play violin at night, and one day you realize you don't need this name anymore. The second possibility is that we lose. Then this name can't protect you anymore, but it won't let you go either." He paused. "Either way, he'll still be here. He can't go anywhere. My question is whether you'll stay, or whether you're only borrowing the Ferrante name for a while before giving it back." Maren stood there, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag, and realized she didn't have an answer at all. Over the past 7 days, she'd answered a great many questions. She'd answered Elias, answered Rosalind, even answered the woman sitting behind the desk on the 12th floor. But not this one. "I don't know," she said. Bruno gave a single nod, and strangely enough, he seemed satisfied. "The other 3 all answered right away," he said, then opened the door for her. Inside, the room was more crowded than she'd expected. Elias stood in the middle of it, speaking with 2 older men, and when he saw her, he only gave the slightest nod without coming over, and Maren understood that this, too, was part of what had to be done. Rosalind sat at a table near the window, entertaining 3 women her own age, and she greeted Maren with exactly 2 words, her name, before returning to the conversation already in progress. Maren stood at the edge of the room near the drinks table, in the kind of place she'd grown accustomed to occupying during the 14 months she'd played at the Ardmore, the place reserved for someone who was present only to serve as a backdrop for everyone else. She'd been standing there for about half an hour when someone approached her. A man in his 60s, wearing a gray suit, carrying an untouched glass of wine, with the walk of someone accustomed to moving through rooms like this. He stopped in front of her and smiled. "Miss Maren Coyle." She looked up. "Yes. I imagine you don't know who I am," he said. "That's all right. I only wanted to say one thing." He looked at her for a moment, and there was something in his eyes Maren couldn't read, something close to sympathy. "I'm very sorry about Emmett. What happened to him was something that never should have happened." Somewhere in the room, glasses touched, and someone near the bar laughed loudly. Maren heard all of it, as though from very far away. "You knew my father. We worked together for a while," the man said. "Not long, but long enough for me to know he was careful. That's the thing I keep thinking about. Emmett was very careful." He inclined his head slightly, the kind of gesture made by someone about to leave. "I wish you all the best, Miss Coyle." "Wait." She took a step after him. "What kind of work did you do with my father?" But he had already turned away, and 3 other people had stepped into the same space at once, and by the time Maren managed to slip past them, the man in the gray suit was already near the door, shaking someone's hand, and then he was gone. She stopped in the middle of the room, her heart beating slowly and heavily, repeating every word in her mind. We worked together. He was careful. Her father had been a musician. He'd played violin in the city orchestra for 19 years, then in hotel lounges, then at weddings, and then he'd stopped. In all 27 years of Marin's life, no one had ever spoken about her father in the tone people used when they were talking about a colleague. Junie waited until the middle of the lunch shift before pulling her into the cold room, and Marin knew immediately that something was wrong, because in the 3 years they'd worked together, Junie Barlow had never stopped moving in the middle of the rush for any reason. The cold room door closed behind them, and the clatter of dishes and the ringing of order bells outside instantly dropped to half their volume. And in that pale, milky cold, Junie held out a sheet of paper folded into quarters. "This came this morning," she said. "The owner handed it to me at 7 o'clock, then went outside and sat there smoking for 40 minutes. Marin unfolded the paper. A notice of adjustment to the commercial rent, effective on the first day of the following month, which meant there were 23 days left. The increase was listed on the third line. She read it, then read it again, then looked up. Triple, Junie confirmed. "You know how much this place makes in a month." The owner said he called the landlord, and they told him the property changed hands last month. All the old leases are still valid, but the new owner has the right to invoke the rent adjustment clause. She paused. "I asked for the company's name. The owner read it to me." Marin looked down at the small print in the bottom corner of the page, at the name of the legal entity, and she didn't need Junie to say it aloud. She'd seen that exact style of lettering on the last page of the stack of documents inside her violin case, and she'd seen it a second time on a file Bruno had pulled from a cabinet beneath the glow of a desk lamp in the room overlooking the harbor. "It's his," she said. "Whose?" Marin didn't answer. She stood there in the cold room, the paper still in her hand, and inside her mind everything suddenly arranged itself into one perfectly straight line, so clear that it made her feel sick. Gideon Stroud wouldn't come back to another hallway. He didn't need to. He'd tried once with his hand and a piece of paper, and the Ferrante name had stopped him in 7 seconds. But the Ferrante name couldn't stop a lawful rent increase notice delivered through the mail. It couldn't stop a renewal contract with the rehabilitation center from coming due next month, the center where Rory was practicing taking 4 steps every evening beside the handrail. And sooner or later, it wouldn't stop a phone call from someone to the management of the Ardmore Hotel, suggesting that perhaps the hotel lobby didn't necessarily need live music 4 nights a week. He was tightening his grip around every lifeline she had, one by one, and he was doing it with paperwork, signatures, and clauses that no police officer in the world could arrest him for. "Marin." Junie stood between her and the door. "Look at me. You know who owns that company?" "Yes." "Does this have something to do with you?" Marin said nothing. That was an answer clearer than any words could have been. Junie let out a long breath, and it dissolved into a thin mist in the cold air. Then she sat down on an overturned plastic crate and wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not asking you what's going on," she said. "I know you won't tell me, and I know you're not telling me because you think I'll be safer that way, so I'm only going to ask you one question." She looked up. "You've been different these past 2 weeks, not in a bad way. The other day, a customer summoned you by tapping his glass against the table, and you straightened up and looked at him until he had to apologize. The Marin from last month would have just walked over, poured his water, and left it at that." Junie tilted her head. "So I want to ask you this honestly, and I want you to answer honestly too. Are you afraid of him? Or are you afraid of the fact that you're not afraid of him anymore?" Marin stood motionless in that cold for a very long time. Outside, an order bell rang 3 times in a row, and someone called Junie's name. She thought about Bruno's question in the restaurant hallway the night before, the question she hadn't been able to answer, and she realized that the 2 questions were really the same one. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," she said. "That's the part that scares me." Junie nodded, stood up, and wiped her hands on her apron. "All right," she said. "Then listen to me. The owner can hold on for 3 months, no more. 3 months from now, this place closes, and you and I go find other jobs, and I won't blame you for a single thing, because I know you didn't cause this." She opened the cold room door, and the noise of the kitchen rushed back in. "But if there ever comes a point when you can do something to keep this from happening, then do it, Marin. Don't wait until everyone has already lost their jobs before you wish you had." She brought the rent increase notice to him that evening, and after Elias finished reading it, after Bruno took it downstairs to compare the legal entity's name against the list in the filing cabinet, the 2 of them were left alone in the room overlooking the harbor, and he told her to go up to the roof because it was too suffocating down there. The roof of that old building held nothing but a few ventilation pipes, a row of rusted iron railings, and a wide stretch of sky above the black water. Maren leaned against the railing, and as always, she left her violin case at her feet. Elias looked at the case. "You carry it everywhere. I don't have anywhere safe to keep it," she said. "My apartment has been searched twice. Why the violin?" She turned to look at him, slightly surprised by the question. In the 11 days they'd known each other, it was the first question he'd asked her that had nothing to do with Stroud, with documents, or with the 31 days that were steadily running out. "I was 6, she said. "My father came home from a performance, opened his violin case, and called me over. He didn't hand me the violin. He gave me the bow first. He put it in my hand, then sat down and adjusted each of my fingers one at a time. My thumb here, my little finger curved there, and he took so long that I thought he'd forgotten I was still standing in front of him." She smiled, and she didn't realize she was smiling. When he was finished, he said, "I'm going to leave it here and I'll wait. Whenever you want to play, you tell me, and if you don't want to, that's all right too. I'm still your father, and you're still my daughter." "How long did you wait?" "Until that afternoon," Maren said. "As soon as I finished eating, I ran over and told him I wanted to learn right then." He laughed until there were tears in his eyes. She was quiet for a moment. "Later, when I was older, we used to play together in a hotel lobby on Sunday afternoons. Not the Ardmore, another place, much smaller. It's closed now. They paid for one musician, but he always brought me along. I played the lower harmony and made mistakes all the time. He never corrected me in front of anyone. He always waited until we got home." Elias said nothing for a long while. Then he said, "He asked whether you wanted it." "What?" "Your father asked whether you wanted it. And then he waited," Elias said. He was still looking out over the water. "I was 19. My father called me into his office, closed the door, put a ledger and a ring of keys on the desk, and told me that starting the next morning, this was what I was going to do. There was no question. There was nowhere for me to give an answer." He gave a slight shrug. "I was going to leave. I really packed my things. Kept the bags in my closet for 3 months. Then he got sick, and I stayed. And by the time I realized what had happened, 15 years had gone by." "Do you ever regret it?" "Yes," he said, "but regret isn't a door. It's only a window. You can look through it, but you can't walk through it." Maren turned fully toward him. In the light rising from the harbor below, the calmness she had hated on that first night no longer looked like armor. It looked like something someone had put on him a very long time ago, something he had forgotten how to take off. "So that's why you want to keep Harbor Point," she said. "It isn't about the land." "It isn't about the land," Elias said. "It's the only thing my father left me that I can turn completely clean. If I can keep it, 3 years from now I can stand in front of Mrs. Whitmore without having to tell a single lie. If I lose it, I lose that window too." The sound of a ship's horn drifted up from somewhere far down the river. He turned toward her, and he said what came next in the same calm voice he always used, without lowering it, without hesitating, and that was exactly why it struck so hard. "I've thought about what happened that night more than I should have, and I have to admit something, Miss Coyle. I don't regret that kiss nearly as much as I probably should." Maren felt the blood rush into her cheeks, and she turned her face away, hating herself for the reaction, exactly as she had hated it in the restaurant in front of Rosalind. She opened her mouth, intending to say something sharp, something that would put everything back where it belonged. Then the phone in her bag vibrated. She pulled it out on instinct, thinking it was Rory. It wasn't Rory. An unfamiliar number. No saved name. No words at all. Only a photograph. Maren stared at it for several seconds before she understood what she was looking at, because she had never seen her home from that angle before. A third-floor window, the kitchen light glowing, the pale yellow curtains she had hung the previous winter, and the silhouette of a young man holding onto the handrail as he moved across the window. The photograph had been taken from the street below, from the other side of the road, looking up. In the lower right corner was the time automatically recorded by the camera, 7:42 tonight. That night, 2 of Bruno's men sat in a car parked across the street from her apartment building, and they stayed there from 11 o'clock until morning, and they would be there every night after that. Maren didn't tell Rory anything about the photograph. She only called a locksmith the next morning and had 2 locks changed, both the front door and the kitchen window, and when Rory asked why she was suddenly replacing both of them, she said she'd managed to save some money, and that became the third lie. That afternoon she went to the building near the harbor, and this time Bruno didn't wait for anyone to ask. He spread a thick stack of documents across the table, and began speaking like a man finally unloading something that had been pressing on his shoulders for far too long. "Wesley Doyle," he said, 26 years old, worked for an auditing firm in the West Loop, quit 6 months ago. The records say he resigned voluntarily, but his former manager told me he didn't hand over a thing. One day he simply stopped showing up. He's the one who signed 3 of the 7 loan documents that carried forged copies of the boss's father's signature. He slid an employee identification photograph across the table. A thin young man with brown hair and glasses, his eyes looking slightly away from the camera. I've been looking for him for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Marin repeated. Since before that night at the Ardmore. Before, Bruno said. The boss gave me the job as soon as the forensic exam came back. I did it the same way I've done things for 27 years. I sent men to his old boarding house, put money in 3 employment agencies around the city, left word at 4 bars where young accountants tend to go. I offered a reward for anyone who could bring me information. It wasn't a small reward. He brought his palm down on the stack of documents. 3 weeks. Not one word. Elias stood beside the window with his arms folded. Bruno thinks he left the city. I used to think so, Bruno said. Now I'm not sure. Marin looked at the photograph on the table for a long time. Then she asked, when you offer a reward, who hears about it? Bruno frowned. What do you mean? I mean, she said, if someone is hiding because he's afraid of being found, what does he do when he hears that people are offering money to locate him? He hides even deeper. You're trying to find him with money and pressure. And money and pressure are the 2 things that made him run in the first place. The room was silent for several seconds. Bruno opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elias said, you have another way? Not yet, Marin said, but I know a place where nobody ever offers rewards. Delmar's opened at 5 o'clock in the morning, and from 5 until 7 almost every customer was a dock worker, truck driver, loader, or shipping office employee, eating breakfast before a shift. Marin had been pouring coffee for those people for 3 years. She knew who drank it black, who added 3 packets of sugar, who always left exactly $1 in change on the table. And she knew something else she'd never thought about until this week, that those people talked to each other as though she weren't there at all. Because in their eyes, she wasn't really a person, she was simply the hand that poured the coffee. So on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning, Marin came to work 20 minutes early, and she didn't ask anyone a single question. She simply poured the coffee more slowly than usual, and she listened. On Friday morning, at table number 4, 2 loaders were talking about the old mill, about how hardly anyone lived around there anymore, and one of them said there were still a few people. That old lady's boarding house still had tenants. My daughter-in-law used to work with her. She said some kid came in last month and rented a room, paid cash for all 3 months at once, no contract, no paperwork, stays shut up in his room all day, and whenever he goes out to buy food, he pulls his cap down over his face. But he looks barely older than a college student. The other man laughed and said he was probably hiding from debt collectors. The first man said, that's what I thought too. Poor kid, he looks scared of something. Marin filled both cups, said thank you, gentlemen, then walked straight into the kitchen, set the coffee pot down on the steel counter, and stood there for 30 seconds, with both hands resting on the metal surface until her heartbeat slowed. Junie found her there. What's wrong with you? Your cousin, Marin said. The one who works at the shipping office. Miles, can you call him? Ask him one thing for me. That boarding house near the old mill, the one owned by an elderly woman. Ask if a young man rented a room there last month, and if he did, what name he gave. Junie stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her phone from her apron without asking another question. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. When she hung up, Junie's face had gone slightly pale. He said the old woman's name is Pruitt. She's somewhere in her 80s, and she rents out 3 rooms upstairs. Miles knows because his company still sends long-haul drivers there when they need somewhere to sleep. Last month, a young guy rented the room at the end of the hall and paid 3 months in advance in cash. She looked up. Mrs. Pruitt wrote his name in the ledger as Wes. They went on Saturday afternoon. 3 cars in all, but only one parked nearby, while the other 2 stopped 2 blocks away. The old mill stood abandoned at the end of the road, its windows boarded over, and about 50 yards from it was Mrs. Pruitt's 2-story boarding house, with peeling paint and a wooden fence leaning to one side. Bruno turned off the engine and sat motionless behind the wheel for a long time. I don't like this, he said. I know, Miss Coyle. I've been doing this for 27 years. The rule is that the person who goes in has to be someone capable of getting back out. You've got nothing in your hands. That's exactly why he'll open the door, Marin said. Think about it. For 6 months he's been sitting in that room waiting for one thing, for someone to knock on his door. If the person knocking is you, then it's the very thing he's been afraid of. If the person knocking is me, it isn't. Bruno looked at her through the rearview mirror. Then he opened the car door, stepped out, and walked over to lean against a lamppost about 30 yards from the house, both hands in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the second-floor hallway. He didn't stop her, but he didn't come any closer either. Mrs. Pruitt opened the downstairs door, her hair completely white, hard of hearing, and when Marin said she was looking for the tenant in the room at the end of the hall, the old woman merely tipped her chin toward the stairs and told her to go on up. Last door. But speak loudly if you want him to hear you. He doesn't open the door for anyone anymore these days. The wooden stairs creaked beneath her feet. The upstairs hallway was dark and narrow, smelling of dampness and old wallpaper. Marin stopped in front of the final door, drew a breath, then knocked 3 times. Nothing. She knocked again. "Wesley Doyle," she said through the door. "My name is Marin Coyle. I came alone." There was the faint sound of footsteps inside. Then silence. She waited. Then the lock turned. The door opened no more than a handspan, and a face appeared in the narrow gap. He was much thinner than he'd been in the photograph, his glasses sitting crooked on his face, and his eyes didn't settle on her. They moved past her shoulder, searching the entire length of the hallway behind her. Then his gaze caught something through the window at the far end of the corridor, the figure leaning against the lamppost outside, and the door began to close. Marin didn't reach out to stop it. She only said, quickly and clearly, "My father's name was Emmett Coyle." The door stopped. It didn't open any farther, but it stopped, and through the narrow gap, Marin saw something pass across the young man's face. Something like the look people get when they hear the name of someone they've spent a very long time trying to forget. "I don't know him," Wesley said. His voice was rough, the voice of someone who hadn't spoken to another person in a long time. "Maybe you don't," Marin said, "but you just stopped closing the door." He didn't answer. "I'm not a police officer. I'm not a lawyer. I pour coffee at a diner down by the docks, and at night I play music at a hotel. I have nothing I could use to hurt you, and if that were what I wanted, I wouldn't have come up here by myself." She lowered her voice. "I didn't come here to drag you into the light, Wesley. I don't care what you signed. I came here for one reason only." She looked straight through the opening in the door. "You're carrying someone else's truth inside you. You've been carrying it for 6 months, and it's killing you." A very soft breath came from behind the door. "You paid 3 months in cash all at once so you wouldn't have to sign a lease. You go out only when you need to buy food. Then you come straight back. You sit in this room, and every time the stairs creak, you hold your breath. Am I right?" The door opened a little wider. "Who told you?" "No one," Marin said. "I can tell just by looking at you. I lived like that for 2 years. The only difference was that what made me hold my breath was seeing an envelope in the mailbox." Wesley Doyle opened the door. The room behind him was small and dark, the curtains drawn shut in the middle of the day, with one bed, one table, and on that table a stack of instant noodle cartons arranged neatly in rows. He stepped back to let her inside, then sat on the edge of the bed, both hands trapped between his knees to keep them from shaking. "You said your father's name was Coyle." "My father died 2 years ago," Marin said, still standing. "Car accident. They said it was because of the rain." Wesley didn't look up. He sat there in silence for a very long time, and Marin let that silence stretch, because she understood that if she said one more word, he would close himself off again. "6 months ago, someone came to my office," he finally said. "No appointment. Told me to come out to the car and talk for 5 minutes. There was already a briefcase waiting inside." He swallowed. Inside the briefcase were 7 sets of loan documents. Everything had already been prepared. Every amount, every date, every term, even the borrower's signatures were already there. The only thing missing was the signature of a licensed auditor certifying that the files had been reviewed. 3 pages. He needed 3 signatures from me to make the whole thing look clean. What was his name? Wesley looked up, and in the eyes behind those crooked glasses was the look of a man stepping through a door he knew he would never be able to walk back through. "Gideon Stroud," he said. Marin sat down in the only chair in the room, facing Wesley, and she asked him why he had run. Because if it had only been 3 signatures, he could have gone on living the way thousands of other people went on living after signing something they never should have signed. Wesley was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I signed the first 2 pages right there in the car. I asked to take the 3rd one back to the office, said I needed to verify the figures." He agreed. He wiped his palms against his pants. "That night I opened the briefcase. Underneath the 7 sets of documents there was another compartment. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did." What was inside? An older file. The paper had yellowed, held together with a rusted metal clip. It had nothing to do with the other 7 files. He must have left it in the briefcase a long time ago and forgotten about it. Wesley looked up. There was a name handwritten on the cover. Coyle. In that small room, Marin could hear herself draw in a breath. I hadn't even finished the second page before I knew I shouldn't keep reading, Wesley said. But there are a few lines I still remember word for word. It was an internal record, the kind people keep to track the progress of a case. One line said the subject refused further cooperation. Another said payment had been returned. He paused. And one line said the documents had not yet been recovered. Marin sat perfectly still. Can you be more specific? There was someone before me, Wesley said. 6 months before me. Maybe 2 years. I don't know. The page I saw didn't list the year. But there was a man named Coyle who did this before I did. And in that file, he wasn't a debtor, do you understand? There wasn't a single line saying he borrowed money. There was an amount listed, but it was in the expense column. He continued the last words very quietly. He didn't run the way I did. He took something with him, and he never gave it back. Marin reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded stack of papers she had carried with her for 11 days. She opened it to the second page, placed it on the bed in front of Wesley, and pointed to the final line of the statement. Look at this number. Wesley looked, then he closed his eyes. That's the number, he said. The one in the expense column. She heard the wooden stairs creak behind her, and knew Elias had come up at some point, and was now standing in the doorway. And she also knew, simply from the sound of his breathing, that he had heard everything. Marin stood. She folded the papers very carefully, slipped them back into her pocket, then turned around. You already knew this. Elias didn't answer immediately. Bruno came up behind him, and Elias raised one hand, signaling for him to stay by the stairs. Yes, he said. Since when? The third day, Elias said. I had my people look into your name after that night at the Ardmore, the way I do with anyone who steps into something like this. My men brought me an old list, a list of people who had once taken money from Stroud and then stopped taking it. Your father's name was on it. 3 lines below that was the date he died. He paused. He died 3 days after the line, saying he had refused to continue. 11 days. Marin counted them again in her mind. Slowly, 1 day at a time. Lunch with Rosalind. Her apartment being searched. The night she brought the papers to him, and he called Bruno in. The restaurant opening. The rooftop. The story about the violin bow. The story about when he was 19. And the thing he had said about the kiss that she had carried with her for several nights afterward, like something that belonged to her. You let me stand on that rooftop and tell you about my father teaching me how to hold a bow, she said, when you already knew he had been murdered. Yes. Why? Because if I'd told you that day, Elias replied, you would have gone straight to the police station within an hour. I knew you well enough to be certain of that, and the moment you reopened your father's accident file, Stroud would have known within a day, and this man, he nodded toward Wesley, still hunched on the edge of the bed, wouldn't have been here when we arrived. Marin looked at him. You weighed that against telling me. Yes, Elias said, and he added nothing to soften it. Marin nodded once, very slowly. She didn't scream. She didn't cry either, and later, when she thought back on it, that would surprise her. She only bent down, picked up her violin case, tucked it against her side, then walked toward him where he stood in the doorway. Do you know what the funniest part is? She said. That night in the hallway, I spent days thinking that at least one person had stepped forward because of me. Then I found out you'd been sitting there for 3 nights waiting for him. I was able to let that go too. I told myself, all right, at least he tells me the truth. She looked straight into his eyes. You're using me too, Mr. Ferrante. You're just a little kinder about it than he is. Then she walked down the stairs, past Bruno as he stepped aside to let her through, past old Mrs. Pruitt sitting in the parlor with her knitting, and out onto the street beneath the late afternoon sun, alone. She came home at 7 o'clock that evening, and didn't turn on the living room light. She sat down on the edge of Rory's bed, in the same place where she had sat every night during the 13 months he was in the hospital, and she told her younger brother everything. She told him from the beginning, from the hotel hallway, from the stack of papers, from the $37,000 figure, from the apartment being searched, from the photograph of the window, all the way to the dark boarding room upstairs at Mrs. Pruitt's house that afternoon. She talked for nearly an hour, and her voice didn't tremble once. Rory sat propped against the headboard with both hands resting on his thighs, and he didn't interrupt her a single time. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long while. Dad didn't die because of the rain, he said. No, you've known since this afternoon. Since this afternoon, Rory nodded. Then he asked, and how long have you had that bruise on your wrist? Marin looked up. The night you said there was a party at the hotel, he said. The night you said they paid you double. I saw it the next day when you reached for the cup on top of the cabinet. I didn't say anything because I was waiting for you to tell me. He looked at her. You didn't. It's been 11 days. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. I'm 20 years old, Rory said. I'm not paralyzed. I can walk 4 steps now, and next month I'll be able to walk 10. And that locksmith who came the other day, I knew it wasn't because you had managed to save some money. I didn't ask because I thought you'd tell me when you were ready. He paused. But today I finally understood that you're never going to be ready. Rory, let me finish. He leaned forward, and there was no anger in his voice, which was exactly why it hurt so much. For the past 2 years, you've done 2 things. You sold the car. You almost sold Dad's violin 3 times. And I know about all 3, so don't think I don't. You took care of everything, paid for everything, and you have never, not once, let anyone help carry any of it. Not even me. He sat upright again. You've been carrying both of us for 2 years, and now you're angry at someone because he kept something from you. Don't you see how strange that is? Marin sat in the darkness for a long time after her brother had fallen asleep. Mrs. Rosalind Ferrante arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning without calling first, and she didn't step inside. She stood in the apartment hallway with her handbag in one hand and said she wouldn't take more than 5 minutes of Marin's time. I didn't come here to apologize for my son, she said. He did what he did, so he can come say whatever needs saying himself. I came to tell you something about me. Marin leaned against the doorframe and didn't invite her in. My husband kept something from me for 4 years, Rosalind said. Not another woman, so don't think that. He signed an agreement with certain people so he wouldn't go to prison, and that agreement bound my son to it too. He signed it when Elias was 18. He told me when Elias was 22. She adjusted the strap of her handbag. During those 4 years, I still cooked for him, still sat beside him in church, still believed I knew the man I was living with. Miss Coyle, I can't get those 4 years back, not because of what he did to me, because I lived all 4 of them in a house I thought I understood. She looked directly at Marin. The men in this family keep silent because they love. That isn't a good enough reason, but it is the real reason. And it took me 4 years to understand the difference between those 2 things. Then she turned away. At the end of the hallway, she stopped. He doesn't know I came here. Don't tell him. Marin went to the building near the harbor that afternoon. Elias was standing beside the table, and he didn't seem surprised to see her, nor did he speak first. She set her violin case on the floor and stood straight. I'm coming back, she said, but I have one condition, and it's the only one I have. Tell me, from now on, anything you learn that concerns me, my father, or my brother, you tell me the same day you learn it, not 3 days later, not when you decide I'm strong enough to hear it, even if it's the worst thing possible, especially if it's the worst thing possible. Elias looked at her. All right, you agreed too quickly. Because you're right, he said. Then he was silent for a while, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, slower, and for the first time since she had known him, it was no longer perfectly even. I'm going to tell you something, and I've never said this to anyone before. I know how to tell the truth to people I'm afraid of. I know how to tell the truth to people I hate. I don't know how to tell the truth to someone I'm afraid of losing. The city hospital's fundraising gala was held on Thursday evening in the grand ballroom of the Ardmore Hotel, and Marin was there for the same reason she had been there for the past 14 months, because management had hired her to play for 2.5 hours, at the rate they had agreed on at the beginning of the year. She arrived before 7 o'clock, tuned her violin in the corner of the room behind a row of columns, and from where she stood, she could see the entire ballroom without anyone seeing her. Rosalind Ferrante was seated at the 3rd table from the podium. Elias wasn't there, and she knew he wouldn't be. Gideon Stroud's name appeared on the donor list, printed in gold on the first line of the program. He went up to speak at 8:45, after dessert, and for the first 4 minutes he talked about the pediatric department, about equipment, about figures that made the entire room applaud. Then he placed both hands on the podium and said he would like permission to add one thing that wasn't on the program. Over the past few weeks, Stroud said, his voice smooth and conversational, there have been several very unpleasant rumors circulating through this city about me, and about certain business dealings of mine. I had no intention of discussing them here, but I do think all of us should be careful about accusations based on the testimony of a young auditor who abandoned his job without notice, is currently hiding from his former employer, and has a professional record that I believe wouldn't survive 10 minutes of scrutiny before any board. A faint murmur moved through several tables. He let it die away. And I also think, he continued, and this time he smiled, that when a man of considerable standing suddenly begins making serious accusations at exactly the same time, he has recently become acquainted with a waitress who plays music for hire in this very lobby, then perhaps we should ask ourselves just how sound his judgment remains. A few people laughed, not many, but enough to be heard. Marin stood in the corner behind the row of columns, the violin still resting on her shoulder, the bow still in her hand. She had been standing in corners like that since she was 6 years old. She had stood there for 14 months in that very room, playing while people ate dinner. And in all those 14 months, not one person had ever turned around to look at her even once. She lowered the violin. She placed it in the case, fastened the clasps, laid the bow across the lid, and stepped out from behind the columns. She crossed 3 rows of tables before the first person realized that something unusual was happening. By the time she reached the middle of the room, every conversation had stopped. Mr. Stroud, her voice carried clearly through the silence, and she was surprised to find that it didn't tremble. I'm the waitress who plays music for hire that you just referred to. My name is Marin Coyle. I'd like permission to say 3 sentences, and then I'll return to my place. He said nothing. He didn't have time to. First, on Monday night, 17 days ago, in this same hotel, you waited for me in the service hallway behind the kitchen door, and you grabbed my wrist. I told you to let go. You didn't. She raised her arm, pulled back her left sleeve, and held her wrist out beneath the lights. The bruise had faded considerably after 17 days, but it was still there, a pale yellow band crossing the bone of her wrist, and from that distance, under that light, all 200 people in the room could see it. Second, you gave me a set of documents with my full name already typed on them, including my middle name, and you told me to sign them that same night. Those documents are still in my possession. I haven't signed them, and if anyone in this room would like to see them, I'm prepared to produce them. Somewhere, a glass struck a plate. No one picked it up. Third, Marin looked directly at him. You just stood there and spoke about whether someone else's judgment is sound. I work 2 jobs, Mr. Stroud. During the day I pour coffee. At night I play violin in that corner over there. I don't have money. I don't have a lawyer. And I have nothing to gain by standing here and saying these things in front of 200 people. You have a great deal to lose if what I'm saying is true. She lowered her hand. That's all. I apologize for interrupting the evening. No one applauded. No one said anything. In that silence came the sound of a chair sliding backward, and Rosalind Ferrante rose from the 3rd table, made her way around 2 rows of tables with the slow, unhurried steps of a woman in her 60s who had no reason to rush, and stopped directly beside Marin, facing the podium. She didn't say a single word. She simply stood there, and the entire room understood what that meant more clearly than any words could have said. Gideon Stroud left the podium after 4 seconds. He didn't go through the main entrance. He took the side passage, and as he passed the 2 women, he stopped for exactly 1 beat, close enough that only they could hear him. This isn't over, Miss Coyle, he said. Then he walked away. Marin's phone vibrated at 11:40 that night, before she had even managed to take off her coat. Bruno was calling, and he said only 4 words. The kid is gone. The house in Bridgeport was a 2-story place, wedged between a row of nearly identical homes, purchased by the family 10 years earlier, and registered in the name of someone who was no longer alive. By the time Marin arrived, every light in the house was on. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, the windows were intact, not a single pane of glass broken, not one latch forced. Half a cup of tea sat cold on the kitchen table beside an open notebook, the final line stopping halfway through a sentence. 2 of Bruno's men had been watching the perimeter since 7 o'clock that evening and had seen nothing. Nobody broke in, Bruno said, his voice dry and hard. Someone knocked, and the kid opened the door. Elias stood in the middle of the living room without speaking for a long time. Then he said, 6 people knew Wesley Doyle was in this house. Me, my mother, Bruno, the 2 men outside, and you. He turned toward Marin. Who did you tell? No one, she said. And the moment the words left her mouth, she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She pulled out her phone and called Junie Barlow at nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Junie answered on the 2nd ring, her voice thick with sleep, then became fully awake the instant she heard the question. Did you tell anyone about what happened last week? About the man at Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house. Silence. Junie. I didn't tell anyone, Junie said. Only Miles. But Miles was the one who helped us. He called me the day before yesterday to ask how things were going. Asked whether that business from before had worked out, and I told him it had. That they'd taken the guy somewhere safe out in Bridgeport, so he didn't need to worry. Her voice grew quieter. Marin, I didn't know it was a secret. You never told me not to say anything. Miles Barlow was 31 years old and worked as a dispatcher at a harbor freight office, and when 2 of Bruno's men brought him to the building at 4 o'clock in the morning, he sat down in the chair without being told, placed both hands on the table, and started crying before anyone had time to ask him a single question. He owed $19,000 in gambling debt, a debt he had carried for 2 years, and every month he paid interest to a man who came to the receiving counter every Friday afternoon. 3 weeks earlier, the man had started asking questions. Casual questions, friendly questions, who was coming, who was going, whether anything new was happening. Miles didn't know who the man worked for. He swore he didn't know. "I sold exactly 1 sentence, Miles said, his face buried in his hands. 1 sentence. He gave me $2,000. I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't know any names. I only repeated exactly what Junie told me." Bruno pushed himself away from the wall. "Boss, let me handle it." And Marin saw it happen very quickly. The way Bruno's shoulders lowered, the way the 2 men standing at the door shifted 1 step inward, the way the temperature of the room seemed to change all at once. She understood then that what they called the family's way wasn't an empty threat, and she understood that it was about to begin right now, in the very room where she was standing. "No." She stepped forward and placed herself between Bruno and the chair. "Miss Coyle, move." "No," Marin said again. She turned toward Elias. "Do you remember the agreement you showed me? The paper with the federal judge's signature. One time, you told me, just 1 incident involving violence and you lose everything." Elias didn't answer. "And even if that paper didn't exist," she continued, "I'd still be standing here." She turned back toward the man slumped in the chair, the man who had picked up the phone and helped her without asking a single question, the man who had given her the first real name in this entire matter. "Look at me, Miles." He raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. "You're not a bad man," Marin said. "You're just a man who's afraid. Someone comes to see you every month, and you don't dare tell anyone, not even your cousin, not even your wife. How long have you been living like that?" 2 years. Miles nodded. "I lived that way for 2 years too," she said. "I know what it feels like to open the mailbox with your hands shaking. I know what it feels like to lie to someone you love because you don't want them to worry. So I'm not sitting here to judge you." She bent down until she was level with his eyes. "But right now there's a 26-year-old man somewhere because of 1 sentence you said. He's just as frightened as you are. He simply doesn't have anyone to call." The room went completely silent. Miles Barlow wiped his face with his sleeve, and it took him a long time before he could speak. "That man doesn't pick anything up at the main counter," he said. "He has a key to warehouse number 4 at the old yard on Canal Street, the yard my company stopped using last year. I saw him coming out of there twice. I thought he'd rented it. I never asked." He looked up at Marin. "Warehouse number 4, at the end of the row, facing the river." They reached the old yard on Canal Street at nearly 6 o'clock in the morning, when the sky had not yet begun to lighten and the surface of the river was still black. Bruno parked about 70 meters from warehouse number 4, turned off the engine, switched off the lights, and sat motionless for 3 minutes before opening the door. Elias got out with him, and when Marin opened her own door, Bruno turned back and told her to stay in the car, and this time she didn't argue, because she understood what she had come to understand the night before, that if she stood there with them, they would have to divide their attention in 2. She sat in the car with both hands resting on the violin case in her lap and watched 3 dark figures move along the edge of the warehouse, separating at the end of the row, 1 man circling around the back, while the other 2 stopped on either side of the metal door. Then, everything happened very quickly, and almost without sound. The door burst open. Someone shouted from inside, a single sentence, followed by the crash of a wooden crate falling over. For the next 40 seconds, Marin saw nothing but shifting patches of shadow moving behind the dimly lit doorway. Then 3 men ran out through a side entrance without looking back, sprinted toward the fence at the far end of the yard, and disappeared onto the road behind it before anyone could catch them. Bruno didn't let his men chase them. He only stood in the doorway and called inside. Wesley Doyle was sitting on the concrete floor behind a stack of pallets, his hands bound with plastic ties, 1 arm of his glasses broken, his face deathly pale. He wasn't injured. When Bruno cut the ties and helped him to his feet, he was shaking so badly that he couldn't stand, and the first thing he managed to say was to ask what time it was. They took him back to the building near the harbor, gave him water, wrapped a blanket around him, and Marin sat down in the chair across from him, just as she had in the boarding room at Mrs. Pruitt's house, and she waited. "They only asked me 1 question," Wesley said after a long while. "From last night until now, 1 question, over and over again." "What question?" "That lower compartment in the briefcase," he said, "the old file with the name Coyle on it. They kept asking how far I'd read." He looked up, and his eyes were beginning to clear again. "Miss Coyle, I told you I didn't even finish the 2nd page. That was the truth. But there was one line at the bottom of that second page that I didn't tell you about that day, because at the time, I didn't think it meant anything. Tell me now. Wesley closed his eyes for a moment, as though he were reading the words again inside his head. It was a handwritten note in ink, along the right margin. Just one sentence. Subject most likely keeping documents inside musical instrument. Never lets it out of his possession. No one in the room said anything. Maren could hear the water beneath the harbor striking the pilings, the same sound she had heard on the first night she stepped into this building. She looked down at her feet. The violin case was there, old and worn, the leather covering peeled away at the corners, the strap replaced twice. It had been on her shoulder for 2 years. It had been on her shoulder the night her apartment was searched the first time, 1 week after her father's funeral. It had rested in her lap at Rosalind Ferrante's dining table on the day her apartment was searched the second time. It had gone with her to the 12th floor, into the cold room behind Delmar's kitchen, up to the rooftop, into the dark boarding room upstairs at Mrs. Pruitt's house. She had opened it 4 nights a week for 14 straight months. Right there in the middle of the hotel lobby where Gideon Stroud sat at table number 7 every Monday night. Maren placed the violin case on the table and opened the lid. The violin lay in its bed of faded velvet, the only thing her father had left her, the thing she had carried 3 times to the music shop on Halsted Street, and brought home all 3 times without selling. She lifted it out, turned it over, and examined the back plate beneath the desk lamp. Along the lower edge, where the back plate met the ribs of the instrument, there was a faint line beneath the varnish, as thin as a strand of hair, something anyone would have taken for a crack in a violin that was 40 years old. She ran her fingertip along it. It wasn't a crack. It was a cut, sealed again with glue and covered with varnish, made by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Bruno handed her a small knife. Maren took it, and her hand was trembling so badly that she had to set it down on the table once before she could pick it up again. She cut slowly along the line, and the back plate came away from the ribs with a dry snapping sound. Inside, pressed flat against the inner surface of the wood, were 2 things. The first was a sheet of paper folded into quarters, graph paper torn from a notebook, covered completely with numbers handwritten in black ink, dates running down the left margin, and 3 initials in the upper corner that Maren didn't understand. She had seen that handwriting once before. In the note written on the final page of the stack of papers a man had forced into her hands in the hallway of the Ardmore Hotel. The second thing was a photograph. It had been taken outdoors, slightly crooked, the kind of photograph someone had snapped in a hurry. 2 men stood beside each other in front of a row of shipping containers, with cranes and the water behind them. One of the men was Gideon Stroud, much younger, his hair still black. Maren didn't know who the other man was, but behind her, she heard Elias draw in a breath. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 2 words in pencil, Harbor Point, and beneath them was a date, 19 years ago. Bruno was the first to understand, and he understood before Elias had even finished setting the photograph down on the table. "No," he said. "Boss, listen to me. You give that photograph to the federal prosecutor, and yes, you prove that Stroud was involved with Harbor Point 19 years ago, but you also prove that your father was standing there beside him. Same day, same place." He slammed his hand down on the table. "I've spent 27 years keeping this family name clean on paper, and you're about to throw all of it away in a single morning." Elias didn't answer. He picked up the photograph and looked at the face of the man who had been a few years younger than Elias was now. The man who had placed a ledger and a ring of keys on the table the day Elias was 19. Rosalind Ferrante sat at the head of the table with one hand resting on her handbag, and she had been silent since the moment she walked into the room. "Let me see it." Elias handed it to her. She held the photograph in both hands and looked at it for a very long time, longer than anyone needed to recognize a man she had lived beside for 38 years. No one in the room dared breathe too loudly. "Bruno is right," she said at last. "People will call him an accomplice. In the newspapers, in the court records, forever." She set the photograph down on the table, turned it back toward her son, and gently pushed it in his direction. "But once, he stood exactly where you're standing now. And he chose silence. And that silence bound you to a piece of paper for 11 years. She looked up. "Your father wasn't brave enough. You are." They turned everything over to the federal prosecutor's office at 10 o'clock that morning. Camille Whitmore kept them there until nearly 1 in the afternoon, asking question after question, comparing handwriting, calling 2 specialists into the room, and when Elias signed the transfer record, she put down her pen and looked at him. "You understand what you've just done. This page ends Stroud. This photograph opens a new case, and the name on that case is your father's name, which means it is your name too." Elias stood and put on his coat. "I've waited 11 years for something strong enough to buy me the right to live differently," he said. "Take it." The arrest warrant still hadn't been issued when Marin returned to the Ardmore Hotel that evening to collect the last of her belongings. She went in through the service entrance as she always had, and at the far end of the hallway, beneath the light that still flickered once just as it had 19 days earlier, Gideon Stroud was waiting for her. He was alone, both hands hung at his sides, and he was holding nothing. "I know you opened it," he said. Marin stopped 5 steps away from him and went no farther. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Stroud said, and his voice was rough now, stripped of the calmness of a man who had always planned 3 moves ahead. "I have one question. Just one. I haven't slept through a single night in 2 years because of it." He looked at her. "What did your father say to you before he died?" In that hallway, less than 100 feet away, the sounds of wine glasses and people laughing still drifted in from the main ballroom, exactly as they had on that first night. Marin heard the question, and suddenly she understood everything. She understood why a man with several hundred employees and 3 law firms would personally walk into a hotel corridor close to midnight to force a hired violinist to sign her name. He had never been afraid of the debt. He had been afraid that a father might have managed to tell his daughter something before he died. "He didn't say anything," she answered. "He only gave me the violin." Footsteps sounded at the far end of the hallway. Stroud turned, and in the pool of light near the doorway stood Elias Ferrante with 4 people in plain clothes, while Camille Whitmore stepped forward holding a document that had been signed less than 20 minutes earlier. Gideon Stroud was convicted 7 months later of document forgery, extortion, and involvement in the death of Emmett Coyle. Wesley Doyle testified for 3 straight days, received immunity from prosecution, and later took an accounting job with a small charitable foundation on the South Side. Harbor Point was preserved and became a fully legitimate transportation operation. Elias Ferrante lost most of the family fortune in the proceedings that followed, and spent 3 years under federal supervision, and not once did he say that he regretted it. 2 years later, on a May morning, the music room on the 2nd floor was filled with sunlight. Marin sat on the rug, placed the bow in her little daughter's tiny hand, and adjusted each finger one by one. Her thumb here, her little finger curved there. Slowly, exactly as her father had done with her when she was 6 years old, the little girl drew one crooked, squealing note from the strings, and burst into laughter that filled the entire room. Rory leaned lightly on his walking cane, stood steadily by the window, clapped 3 times, and laughed alongside them. Elias stood in the doorway watching them, his hands holding nothing at all. Rosalind sat in the chair by the window, and without looking at anyone in particular, she said that you can't save someone by keeping silent for them. Only the truth can save people, even when it comes late. If Marin's story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so that every day you can discover more stories worth hearing. How did today's story make you feel? And what part of it reminded you of someone in your own life? Please leave a few words in the comments. We sincerely want to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish you and your family lasting good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.